Very good. So we've taken care of some of those links, and we'll get to the text and what they look like in a little bit. But for the moment, what I want to now address is the fact that inside of our main area, we have lorem ipsum text as a H2 headline and a paragraph. I'm going to actually copy that information and paste it directly underneath again. And perhaps what we can do is also create a H3 in here. And I'll just change what this secondary title says. Perhaps I'll just say a subheadline. And we have pretty much the same paragraph of information, although if you wanted it to look a little bit differently, perhaps I'll just make it a little smaller than the previous one. If I preview this in the browser after saving it, you'll notice that it just creates a little bit of longer text. I like it, so I'm actually going to create another copy of it. It doesn't really matter what the text says at this point. We just want to get a sense of what it looks like. And I'll say another subheadline. Save that information. Actually, maybe I'll even add a little bit of text in here so that it's a bit of a longer paragraph. And I'll save that, preview in the browser. And essentially, we should see that this area is longer than this area, which is just fine. It's exactly what I wanted it to be looking like. Good. So we've got that in place, but as you can see, especially when I have my hover state in here, the text is touching dangerously close. It's actually right on the edge, and the text over here is right on the edge too. That's because there's no margin and padding on these boxes. Now, one of the things that I want you to be aware of is that we gave a definition in our CSS for that main area. We said the width of the main was 760. Now look, if I wanted to add some margin or padding directly to the div called main, that's going to be a problem, because what CSS doesn't take into account is the fact that you have a width, and if you add a margin, it just makes the width be larger. So it'll add an extra 10 or 20 pixels depending on what you want. So hypothetically speaking, let's take a look. If I were to come in here and say, hey, you know what, let's put even padding, for example. Let's say I want padding on the left-hand side of the main box, right? So if I were to say even 10 pixels, actually even 1 pixel will throw it off. If I save this and then preview this in my browser again, let's take a look at what happens. Ooh, you see that? It's pushed this actually underneath this one. And the reason being is because if this is 200 and this was 760, that equaled 960 evenly. But since I put padding of 10 here, what ends up happening is that we now have too much space. It's actually not 960, it's 970. So they don't match up, they don't meet up in the same area. So that's a problem. So I'm going to ask you to get rid of that. Instead, what we're going to be doing is addressing all of our text so that each one of these elements of text can have the padding on the text itself as opposed to the padding on the box that's containing it. So if we remove the padding or the margin on that box, we don't have to worry about our widths getting all screwed up. So instead, what I'm going to be doing is addressing how to do this inside of the main area as well. So let's think about what main has. Well, I'm going to come in here with the selector called main, and I know that there is a H2 in here that we want to be addressing. As well, there is a H3, and there's also paragraph. So to all of these, we are now going to be adding some extra information. So let's see what we can add inside here. Well, technically speaking, I just want to give it a little bit of padding on either side, that's for sure. So let's come in here and let's see what we can do. Let's say padding on the, well, let's start with the left, maybe a generous amount of 20 pixels. That is a little generous, but okay for what I want to do. And I also want to be doing a padding on the right of the same amount. All right, so now that we've got that in place, I'm going to save this. And if we preview in the browser, you'll see that everything's going to smash up all nicely together. Let's take a look. Over here, we don't actually have any information touching the edge. Perfect. There's 20 pixels of padding. What about over here? Well, you can't really see it if I don't have anything, but you will notice that because I happen to have this information over here, that produces a really nice value for us, right? You can see that there is 20 space there. What if we wanted to include like a line going all the way down? Well, if I approached it from the navigation side and put like a border only on one side, it would end right here, which might be fine. It might be exactly what you want. But if you want a line that goes all the way down, well, this is bigger than this area, so we would put a border on the left-hand side of this one. Do remember, however, that whatever the size of your border happens to be, for example, if it's just 1 pixel, then the problem being is that you're going to have to adjust the width, because just like padding and margin, extra border information adds to the width of the box, but that's not something that the browser is really going to be able to distinguish. So let's approach that as well. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go back to my element, and here is main, as we saw before. And let's imagine that on the left-hand side of main, I wanted to create a border. So if we do that, we could say border on the left, and let's give it a color. Maybe something that's a nice faint sort of gray. I think that should be just fine. And if we're happy with that on the left-hand side, right now, if I were to leave this and just save it, let's take a look. You can see that, well, nothing's really happening. And that's because we need to put some extra information inside here. So it wasn't enough to just give it a color. We've also got to add some other things. So I've just written out border left width is 1 pixel, border left style solid, just a solid line going all the way down the left-hand side. But remember what I told you, even 1 pixel will turn this off. So if I come into my browser and preview what I've just done, as you'll see in just a second, you'll notice that, oops, there you go. You see the 1 pixel browser problem that's occurring is it's pushing it underneath. So if I'm 1 pixel off, what do you think we have to do? Yep, change the size of the main area. So instead of 60, we're going to say 759. If I save this now and preview it in my browser, everything works out just fine. And there's a little separation that's happening here. You may or may not want it to go all the way down. If you don't, then you can make it be on the right-hand side of your navigation element. So right now, I'm fairly happy with what I'm seeing. I don't really have a problem with it. There are some issues here related to the top and the bottom of the elements, and the simple fact that all of these elements actually have not a lot of spacing going on inside them. Now, that's not a problem here when it comes to my headlines, and I kind of like the amount of space or the proximity of my text to my headlines. That kind of lets me know what's going on. But I do think we need a little bit of extra space in the paragraphs themselves. So we could do it at the top of a paragraph, but that's going to push it down a little bit. It's really more at the bottom of the paragraph, so that's going to take care of this area over here as well. So let's go back to our elements, and here we are in our code view. And what I want to do is, as we said, main, H2, H3, H paragraph. Well, listen, H2s and H3s are not going to have any bottom margin. So I'm actually going to add another bit of information here. Actually, let me just copy this information. I'll paste it. And it's really only the paragraphs that I'm addressing at this moment inside main. So if we were to say paragraphs on top, and I don't know, maybe just give a little bit of information like 4 pixels, and paragraph on the bottom padding. So I'll come in here and I'll say, excuse me, bottom. On the bottom, maybe I'll give it something like 10. Let's save it and let's see what it looks like just so we can discern exactly how this is looking. So a little bit up on top, more on the bottoms. I think I actually want even more on the bottoms just to be a little bit more generous with what these things look like. So I'll save that and then I'll preview it. Good, good. So you can see that it's not touching the edge there. It's pretty much the height that I want over here. Although if I wanted to, I could have said, listen, you know, all of these elements may in fact contain, let's say, 4 pixels. So I could do that too. I could say, look, I'll take away the one that's on the padding. So I'll just remove it this way. And I'll share that over all the headlines and the padding as well. So that first headline up on top will also have the same. You'll notice there's going to be a little bit 4 pixels down here too. So you see that? These things look like they belong together because they're closer together. I've separated the bottoms of the paragraphs even more, so that makes these things look like they're all 3 solid chunks of information. Very nice. So great way that you can sort of work with that. Can be done with padding. It can be done also with margins if you prefer. But at this point, I think we're pretty good to go, and we're pretty happy with the way things are looking. So we've got some links in here. We've also got some elements down here. Let's come back in the next video and we'll put in some content in the footer as well as inside the header.